Hi, today is the 1st of February, so happy almost Groundhog Day. I don't know that I actually believe that a rodent can predict the weather, but I don't know about you, but I could really live with a little bit less winter this year. A friend of mine just sent me a note that said, this January has been a long year. Congratulations on surviving it. And that's pretty much how I feel right now. So as you can see, I'm back at work. Yay! I'm in my office. I'm wearing clothing, not pajamas. So I am definitely on the mend. And I wanted to thank you all for your patience when I was sick. I am still a little bit behind, but I'm doing my best to get caught back up. And it really was great for me to be able to email with so many of you while I was sick and know that I could still answer your questions, even though I wasn't really fit to be around human beings. And so I want to thank you for all that. And a special shout out to Lizette, who was my guinea pig for my first ever WebEx session yesterday. It didn't work 100% because I couldn't get the video to work, and it turns out there was something wrong with the camera on my computer. But as you can tell, that's now fixed. So thank you for your flexibility. And if anybody else wants to set up a WebEx session, I know what I'm doing now. And so if that's useful for you to talk either by the phone or by WebEx to get feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out and schedule a time for that. And also, like, if email works best for you, keep sending emails and I'll keep replying as soon as I can. I just sent around a video for you all about the State of the Union. And some links to connect to that. And obviously, the State of the Union connects to class in the sense that it is a little bit of a, as I say in that video, a little bit of a roadmap for policy for this year. And I wanted to talk a little bit about your social problem assignment that you just finished. Everybody, if you go into Blackboard, you should be able to see your grade and your feedback on your topic assignments. And for the most part, one of the things that I'm really excited about is there's such a wide range of topics that you're interested in. And so, your fellow students are interested in everything from, human trafficking to climate change to abuse that happens to people with intellectual disabilities, abuse that happens to kids in the foster care system, aging out of foster care. So there's just such a range of interests and experience in the class. And I think by the time we get to the end, when you'll get to do your presentations and share them with each other, I think you'll really have the opportunity to learn quite a bit from your classmates. And I'm going to learn quite a bit from your projects as well, which I really appreciate. One thing that I did mention to a few of you is that it's really important to try to frame this as a problem. We will talk about policies, but we are going to start with sort of what is the problem that those policies are trying to fix. Thinking about that as you go forward and trying to sort of maintain your focus on that will be really important. And the other thing that I mentioned to a few of you was to think really carefully about the sources that you're using. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about that. There is a great set of videos on the Sacred Heart Library that I think are actually part of your reading for next week that give you a little bit of information on looking for and evaluating sources. And that's something that we're going to continue to talk about both this semester and next semester. The idea that some news is fake news or not accurate, or some sources have a bias, is something that as a country we've talked about a lot this year, but it's been an issue for a long time, right? And so I think that as you're moving forward in this assignment, it's a good opportunity to, as you find sources, really take a moment to think about who the author is and who might be funding it and what kind of sources publishing it, and whether or not you think the information that they have is reliable. And so if in your feedback I said you need to make sure that your sources are scholarly, or if I said you need to make sure your sources are rigorous, what I mean by that is that we want to use information that is as accurate as possible, of course, that is backed by data, that is not somebody's opinion. And I really want you to encourage you to think about that as you go forward. There was one person who used a blog that was a person's story about an experience they've been through, and that's great if you want to throw in a little bit in your paper to sort of highlight what the social problem you're talking about is really like for someone. And that, of course, doesn't need to be scholarly, right? People get to tell their own experiences And that's a great use of something that's maybe not a peer-reviewed journal or sort of like more scholarly, but really adds some emotion to your paper, and that people can really understand what their problem feels like. But that should be relatively few and far between, right? The majority of your sources should be more scholarly. And what that might mean is that you find them through the Sacred Heart Library, that they're a peer-reviewed journal or book that we have available through our library. For a lot of the things that you care about, there you are going to do some research online to find those, and that's fine. Just again, as you're doing online research, think about how reliable the source is and whether you trust it. I am always happy to be a second opinion for you, and so if you found a source and you're not sure how reliable it is, you're always welcome to just send me an email with the link and say, is this something that you think is good? Would you cite this? Would you use this if you were writing about this? And I'm happy to give you my opinion or give you some criteria to use. And that leads nicely into the assignment that is due this Sunday, which some of you have done. And what you'll do for that assignment is you're actually going to download a worksheet and you're going to fill in information about the reference itself, and then tell me a little bit about why you think that's a good reference for for this project you're working on. And it asks you to do that for 5 references. The format of that is that it asks you to put in all the information for a journal article, since that's a lot of what we use in social work. But you are not restricted to those. If you'd like to use a book, if you'd like to use a website, that's fine. And you can just sort of put those in the spreadsheet and just sort of leave out the parts that don't apply to the particular kind of reference that you're using. That's fine. But again, right, I'm looking for, one of the things I'm looking for is, did you think about how good this source was when you decided to use it? Depending on the feedback that you got from me on the social topic assignment, you might decide to tweak that assignment a little bit. And some of you, and I mentioned this in an announcement earlier today, some of you have already submitted that assignment. If you've already submitted it but you want to make some changes to it based on that feedback, you're welcome to do that. Just let me know, and I can go in and reopen the assignment, or you can submit it to me via email. We'll figure it out. But I don't want anybody to feel like I haven't looked at them. So I'm not saying that anyone did it incorrectly or that anyone needs to make changes to it, but I just want you to know that that's an option in case you decide to make a big enough change that you feel like that list doesn't really apply to you anymore. And these little assignments that we're doing as we're going along are really set up so that you are starting to think now and refine your problem and come up with sources, and you might change your problem. You might change your topic. You might find and then discard some sources. And that's a totally normal part of the research and writing and thinking about a new thing process. So that can feel frustrating sometimes. I mean, I've frequently written a paper and then I go back and I delete like half of it. I try not to, because that's a lot of work, but that's a normal part of the process, right? Of starting someplace and then realizing it's not exactly what you had in mind and then going back and editing. So if that happens to you, if you feel like you need to make some changes to that problem that you submitted, I don't want you to think of that as that you're making a mistake or you're doing it wrong. That's absolutely a normal part of this process, and it's good. It means you're thinking about and you're making changes now rather than having the whole paper done and then realizing that you need to make some changes to it. So that assignment about the sources is due no later than Sunday. I also just wanted to say heads up into next week. One of the assignments for next week is to watch a video that you're going to discuss, and just so there's a choice tool in the activities section for week 5 that asks you to go in and pick a video, and you'll see it's in red on the top that there's 8 or 9 videos. I think it's 8 videos to choose from about different social problems, and you're going to pick any one of those that you want to watch, but only a maximum of 3 people per video. And given the number of students in the class, I would actually encourage you to really think about videos on that list that nobody else has chosen, right? Because then we'll sort of have the range of them. The link to the videos themselves, if you want to take a look as you make those decisions, is on Blackboard in the reading section for week 5. And of course, you're not limited to only watching one. If you want to watch more than one, if you find many of them interesting, you should feel free. Definitely look at all of them and see if any of them are relevant to your social problem. They could certainly be an additional reference for your paper. But you need to watch at least one, and then that'll be part of your discussion assignment for next week. So just know that that's coming up. I myself am going to watch all of them because I need a refresher on all of them. So I'm trying to figure out how I can do a little mini movie marathon this weekend when there are no small children around who might not be quite ready to hear about things like mass incarceration or the water crisis in Flint. Maybe we don't need to start talking about that at age 4. um, and then this week is the content of our class for this week is this is really the last week we're focusing on history. Next week we're gonna move to thinking a little bit more about power and privilege and how that plays into the policy process, which I think you'll find will fit nicely into the work that you did last semester in your human diversity class. And I did want to tell one story about one of the readings that you'll do this week. So you have a video this week, and there's a longer video if you want to learn more about her in the suggested reading section. There's a video about a woman named Dorothy Height. So Dorothy Height is amazing. If I was forced to pick a favorite social worker, which would be very hard for me, I would pick her. Dorothy Height was one of the leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States, one of the few women who really had a leadership position and was like out there publicly speaking for the civil rights movement. It was a very male-driven movement, and she was a social worker. And I met her several years ago at an event for social work students in Washington, D.C. And I had not ever met her before, and I didn't know much about her at the time. And she came into this room that was full of like 250, mostly undergrad social work students, and they wheeled her in her wheelchair. She was in her, I think, her late 80s at the time. And she was this little tiny woman with this giant hat. And especially, if you are like one of our colleagues from the South, you know that like in a lot of African American communities, like hats are a huge sort of part of the culture and the fashion. And so she had this really phenomenal hat on. And I thought this might be a disaster, right? Like, are we going to be able to get these students to like sit quietly and pay attention to, what she has to say? And they rolled her in her wheelchair and she took the microphone and she said in this really strong voice, she said, in 1929, when I graduated from high school, if you were a girl, you had two choices. You could be a teacher or you could be a social worker. And I decided to be a social worker. And you could have heard a pin drop in the room. It was completely silent. And the students just sat just enthralled by her the whole time that she spoke because she had such a presence. And, she told a story about meeting Martin Luther King Jr. when he was 14, and he was trying to decide if he should be a minister or a lawyer or what he should do with his life. And she met him and talked with him then, and then of course was really involved working alongside him in the civil rights movement. And pretty much every president for decades, she was this really strong voice in particular for African American women, and she was sort of a mentee of Mary McLeod Bethune, who was just one of the another amazing African American woman in the civil rights movement. And so she, for a long time, Dorothy Height was the person that anyone called if they really wanted to understand what was going on with Black women, or they wanted to get their message out to Black women. She was sort of their person. And I'll include a link to this in the announcement. Dr. Height wrote a book called Open Wide, The Freedom Gates, which I highly recommend. And she also was just this really active member of the community and leader. She actually was on the group of people who wrote something called the Belmont Report, which you'll learn about more next semester in research, but some of you might remember it from your undergraduate time, which set the research ethics standards for the entire country, for all of the research that's done in the United States. And it's a set of ethics that has been copied by many, many, many other countries as well. And Dorothy Height was on that group because she saw vulnerable groups like African American women, African American men, people who were poor, who were being used by research that then they didn't benefit from. They were being used by research to help, create medicine that would that they couldn't afford to buy. And so she really was sort of the voice for those people on the Belmont Report, on the committee that created the Belmont Report and changed the way that we do research in the United States. So she's amazing. And I'll include a link to her book. And there's also, as I said, there's an additional, much longer video about her in the suggested readings for this week that you might enjoy. All right, but this video is almost 15 minutes long. If you've got any questions about anything, you know how to find me. I'm going to keep giving you feedback on the stuff you've submitted online and try to get caught up quickly. I wrote myself another note that I have absolutely no idea what it means. Oh, I do. Hang on. So one of the things that was on your reading for last week was the very first social work textbook ever, Social Diagnosis by Mary Richmond. And I forgot to tell you all that I have a copy of it. So this is Social Diagnosis, and it's a little bit beat up. This was a friend of mine who lived in West Hartford, Connecticut. There was just a stack of books in the attic of the house that he lived in, like old books. And he was like, his landlord was throwing them all away, and I went up there and I was like, you can't throw away Social Diagnosis. This is not an original. Social Diagnosis was written by Mary Richmond in 1917. This is from 1934, but still not bad. I probably should throw this. Crumbles a little bit every time I take it off to show to people, but I'm trying to keep the book cover on. But this is the first social work textbook ever, so all of your other books that you ever read, including the ones this semester, this is their ancestor. Anyway, I hope you think that's cool. I'm a nerd. I think it's awesome. All right, so if you need anything, you know where to find me. If you want to do a phone call or an email or a WebEx, just reach out to me and let me know. And I hope you're having a great week. I'm looking forward to reading all of what you have been putting online, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!